Thanks for joining us for this podcast from Atlee Church. Atlee is a safe place for those who've given up on church or never went. Our mission is to reach seekers and equip believers to love God, love themselves, love others, and serve the world. We'd love to have you connect with us at one of our physical campuses or online for a weekend service. You can find out more about our locations and service times on our website. We hope that you will be encouraged and challenged to take the next step in your personal faith journey through the message you're about to hear.
Well, hello everyone. That was weak. It's sunny outside. Y'all should be more excited than that. Hey everyone. There we go. That's a little bit better. Well, welcome to Atlee Church. So glad that you're with us today. Those here in Mechanicsville at our Scottsdale campus, West End campus, and those tuning in to watch us online today. So glad that you're here in part 2 of a series that we started last week called One Life, Live It. And so I need you to do me a favor real quick. Turn to somebody next to you and say, live your life. Can you do that for me real quick? Say, live your life. Some of you just said that to a stranger. That was pretty awkward, wasn't it? Awesome. Well, so glad that you're here with us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Trey Kreitzer. I'm our Scottsdale's campus pastor and one of the teaching pastors here on staff. And I'm so glad that you decided to join us for this series because I feel like more than any series we've done before, this one is really important, not only for your life, but also for the lives around you. Because I feel like if we could get this right, it could change a lot of areas in our lives. And for those of you who don't know me, I was trying to be here last week, but I got sick at the last minute and had to call our executive pastor Saturday night at about 7 o'clock and said, hey man, I'm not going to be there. I can barely get out of bed. My wife tells me I look like one of the zombies from Walking Dead, and it's not going to happen. And he's like, oh no. So I give it up for Mark Tapscott. He did an incredible job last week filling in for me and making it happen. And if you missed that message, go back on our podcast and watch it. He did a great job kind of setting the stage for this series. But I also wanted to say thank you for those of you who have been praying for me and my family. It's been a crazy few weeks for us. We've gone through a lot in the last few days and weeks. My grandmother, who's been battling Alzheimer's for a while now, finally, we got a call from hospice during the week, and they said, you know, she's probably got a few days left. Y'all should probably come visit her before she passes. So my family and I got to go have a great moment with her, and she got to meet her grandson, and it was just a great moment for us to spend with my grandmother. And then a few days later, we get a call from my uncle, my dad's brother, found out that he had cancer and probably had maybe a year to live. And then the next day, got another call from my uncle sharing with us that it moved from 1 year to live to about maybe 1 day to live. The cancer had spread that fast. So last Thursday, we lost my grandmother and my uncle all in the same day. And so it was a pretty hard week for us as a family, and it's been a trying time, and plus being sick on top of that was no fun. So thank you all for your prayers and your kind messages and everything that you sent me and my family. We really do appreciate it. But more than anything, during this time, I've realized how important a series like this is when we talk about that we get one life to live, one story to tell. And it's important for us to tell that story as best we can and to live every moment that we can because we're not promised tomorrow. Every single one of us, whether we like it or not, we have an expiration date. And all of us are going to pass at some moment. So it's important for us and imperative for us to realize today that our lives count and they matter and that every day really is a gift from God. And I know I'm not the only one that's experienced stuff like this or are experiencing stuff like this in their life right now, whether it's loss or tragedy or some kind of suffering or pain or bad news. All of us have had things like this happen in our lives. So it's important for us to figure out how to live the one life that God has called and created every single one of us to live. And that's why I feel like this series is so important for us during this time in our life. Because like Mark talked about last week when we listened to the Kenny Chesney song, when our life runs out of sand, we can't flip it over and start again. And a lot of us, we think that life is like that our life's like an hourglass and we get a reset button, but we don't. And so it's imperative, like I said, for us to have this conversation over the next few weeks together. Mark also mentioned last week the story that kind of framed this whole series was by a guy named Tony Campolo. He was a popular kind of leader and teacher in his time, and he did this study. He took 50 people over the age of 95, and he basically had a conversation with them, and he asked them, if you could go back in time and do your life all over again, what would you do differently? And so he interviewed these 50 people, and the kind of conclusion and data kind of came to basically three big subjects. And this is what the people said if they could go back and live their lives all over again, is that they would reflect more, they would risk more, and they would do more to help other people. That was kind of the three big categories. And last week we talked about the idea of reflection and why it's important for us to take time to think about the life that we're living. Because we see Jesus take time away from ministry and away from all the things he was doing to simply spend time with God, to reflect and have a moment where he could think about his life, what he was doing and why he was doing it. And so if the Son of God had to take time to reflect, we probably should do the same thing as well. Which leads us to our next subject today, which is maybe a fun one for some of us or maybe not so fun for others of us, is to risk more. To risk more. And so to kind of kick off our time together, I want to do kind of a self-evaluation for a moment. Hopefully you got one of these when you came in. Go ahead and pull that out. And on the back, you're going to see like a little chart arrow line. And it says on one side, low to no risk, moderate or high risk. And I want you just to take a moment, whether you got a pen or not, or maybe you just do it mentally. Go ahead and think about how much of a risk taker are you? How much of a risk taker are you on this scale? Low, moderate, or are you high risk? And if you're watching online with us today, just think about a scale of 1 to 10. Low being, 1, no risk, and then 10 being high risk, like you're ready to go skydiving tomorrow kind of stuff. Where would you fit on that scale of 1 to 10? Because I think it's important for all of us to realize how much of a risk taker we are. Now, how many of us, if we were to be honest with ourselves this morning, you would say that you are a low risk taker? Anybody? Okay, a few of you. How many of you would say you're a moderate risk taker? Like you like a little sense of risk? How many of you are like me and you are a very high risk individual? Awesome, I'm not the only crazy person in here. That's great, awesome. Well, it's awesome to know, and it's important for us to know kind of where we are on that scale, because whether we like it or not, all of us are going to experience some sort of risk. And it makes me think about when I was a camp counselor at my parents' summer camp. They run a camp for kind of teenagers and young adults, and I worked there during the summers when I was in college. And every year they would plan a trip specifically for the staff to go out and to have some kind of team building, bonding moment. And as the staff kind of got older and we got wiser and we were there longer, they decided to do more risk-taking things. So one summer, they signed us all up to go whitewater rafting. Anybody ever done this experience? Yes, you know that this is an adrenaline junkie's dream, right? It is a lot of fun. So they signed us up, we get on a bus, we go out to the whitewater rafting place and stay the night there. The next morning we wake up, and it didn't matter whether you were a low risk taker on the staff or you were a high risk taker on the staff. This trip was mandatory for everybody. Needless to say, we lost a lot of staff that year, but it was a great idea for team building. So we get out there and we get in our raft and we're paddling, and it's fun at first and very scenic, and we're seeing the mountains and bridges and stuff. And we kind of get to our first little obstacle. And it's like this rapid, and on the side of the rapid, I noticed something though. There was like this hook rock that was hanging off, and it looked really sharp and dangerous. And, I was a little curious. So I asked our, captain tour guide person, hey, what's up with the crazy rock next to the rapid? And this guy, let me just say, I don't know if he was the most qualified tour guide on the rafting trip experience. And here's what he told us. This is very first thing that we see. He says, you know what? That's called the meat grinder. And I was like, okay, why do they call it the meat grinder? And I knew when I said it, I was making a mistake by asking the question. And he goes, man, that rock has taken more lives than any of them out here. They grind your meat all up. So why did I sign up for this team building experience? This was a dumb decision, right? And so we're paddling towards the meat grinder, and he says, paddle, paddle. And all the water's flying in our raft, and people were going crazy, and we finally survived that moment. And he goes, yeah, y'all are the lucky survivors. Thanks, bro. I appreciate this trip. So we all make it to the end of the rafting experience, and we all grew closer to each other and to Jesus because most of us spent most of our time praying that we would survive. But it was an incredible experience. I don't know if it was great for the low-risk takers, but for me, it was an incredible time. But I remember during that trip, we grew closer together as a staff because we had an experience like none other. And we talked about it the rest of the summer because there was a risk that we were willing to take with one another. And it was these stories that came out of the risk that were just incredible. And I think all of us have stories like that when we did risk, when we took a chance, when we went out there and did something that we've never done. It's an experience that we remember when we reflect upon it. But how many of us understand and know that the older we get, the more comfortable we get, the more risks that we stop taking? And today, what I want us to do is figure out how to be the risk takers that God has called us and created us to be. And so if you have a Bible, we're going to look at a story in the Bible of a guy who had a very similar experience to me, but in a different way, in a reaction with Jesus. And he got to take the risk of a lifetime. His name was Peter, and we find his story in the New Testament section of our Bible, Matthew 14, verses 22 through 23. If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn with me there. If not, we're going to throw it on the screens for you. But this is an incredible moment where Jesus has already kind of been performing some incredible miracles. And these disciples, these followers of him, kind of began to be in ministry with him and got to see some incredible things he was doing. And this is just another one of those experiences. And this is what it says, starting in verse 22. It says, immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up to a mountainside by himself to pray. This is the moment where we see Jesus take time for reflection, and this is what he does after that. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. They said, "It's a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." Verse 28 says, "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come out on that water." Verse 29, Jesus simply just says, "Come." Then Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water, and he came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him, and he says, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now, this is an incredible story because the disciples got to see Jesus once again perform another incredible miracle, but not just to see the miracle, they got to be a part of it. For those of you who are a little bit more visual like me, let me draw it out for you so you can really understand this whole experience. So Peter is in this incredible boat. Kind of looks like a little pirate ship there, but stay with me, I'm not much of an artist. So Peter's in the boat, right? And Jesus simply says, "Peter, I want you to get out of this boat and I want you to come follow me. I want you to step out. I want you to walk on water." Now, recorded to this date, nobody had ever done this, even in the Bible. Jesus and Peter are the only two recorded people in history who were able to walk on water. and it's only recorded in one of the Gospels. And so, if you were Peter in this moment, and you had to literally step out of the boat onto windy water and expect to walk, that's a pretty incredible thing to do. Because logically speaking, if you're like me and you're like you, we all know what happens when you step out of a boat into water. What happens, right? You sink, right? It makes no logical sense why Peter in this moment would have said, sure, I'm willing to risk it. But what we do see in this story is that Jesus calls Peter and says, come, and Peter, without blinking, jumps out of the boat and begins to walk on the water. Now, this is an incredible miracle story where we get to see Peter take a risk. And because of the risk that he took, he was able to see something that was on the other side of his risk. And I wonder today, if you and I, maybe we're not walking on water like Peter, but there's something that Jesus has asked us to risk, but yet we've been unwilling to take that risk. But here's the thing. We may not know what's on the other side of our risk until we're willing to step out of the boat. And so today, what I want us to do with our remaining time together is to have a discussion to figure out why Peter made this decision. And because of the risk that he took, what were the implications because of him taking that risk? So if you have your program, go ahead and turn on the back. We're going to have some fill in the blank time together. The first blank here I want you to understand about risk. Number one is that risk leads to new opportunities. Number one, risk leads to new opportunities. Peter said, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and he came towards Jesus. We got to see Peter have a completely new opportunity that he had never had before. That was better than any jet ski rental on vacation, right? Like, he literally got to walk on water with the Son of God. How incredible of a moment is that? And for Peter, he didn't know what opportunity was on the other side of his risk. And most of us, what intrigues us about risk so much is that there's an opportunity on their side that we never know what's there until we're willing to take it. Today, what opportunity is on the other side of you stepping out of the boat that you're on? You may never know what's on the other opportunity of your risk until you're willing to take it. You may never know what opportunity there is for this relationship to be restored, what job may be out there, what story you get to tell, what joy you could find, what forgiveness you could seek, and what healing you could discover on the other side of your risk. But here's the thing. You will never know what that opportunity is until you're willing to take a chance and take the risk. Peter is the only person, like I said, recorded in history that had the opportunity to do this because he was willing to take the risk that none of the other disciples were, and he made history because of it. That's why risk is tough, though, isn't it? Because we don't know what's on the other side. If we knew what was on the other side, we could evaluate the probability, and then we could decide whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. But we never know what's on the other side of our risk until we're willing to take the chance. But what opportunity is on the other side of your risk if you're willing to take it this morning? What opportunity awaits you if you're willing to take the risk? Most of us don't step out or try or risk because we're afraid of the unknown. But what I love about Jesus is that he is the king person of getting people to step out of their comfort into an incredible new opportunity. There's mystery, there's excitement, there's joy. But along with opportunity comes another side of risk that maybe you and I are more familiar with than we realize. Number two is that risk confronts our insecurities. Number two, risk confronts our insecurities. While opportunities are exciting and we're willing to take risks because of it, a lot of us don't risk because we're afraid of being exposed. We find that Peter in his life is now vulnerable. He actually takes his life and he's exposed in front of all his friends and homies of the disciples that he had been hanging out with. And not only is he exposed there, he's now exposed to God. And here's what we read about Peter. He says, God tells him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And then they climbed into the boat and the wind began to calm. In this moment, Peter finds out something that he didn't even know about himself, that he was full of doubt and he was full of a lack of faith. He was exposed before everybody. But what I love about this, when we expose our insecurities, we get the opportunity to grow like never before. But most of us hide behind our convenience and our comfort because we're afraid of what will be exposed if we take a risk. But the thing is, if we don't risk, we do not grow. And so if there's a risk that you feel like you've been trying to take, but you haven't been willing to step out, may I encourage you today, don't be scared of exposing your insecurities. Because when you do expose your insecurities, it gives you an opportunity to grow like never before. It allows you to become the person that God created you to be. But it's not a fun process. But the other side of it is incredible. I was reading a book as I was getting ready for this series. It's called The Last Arrow, Save Nothing for the Next Life by a guy named Erwin McManus. And he begins to talk about his story and his life and some of the struggles that he went through to discover the life that God had created for him. And here's a great way that he puts it when it comes to our idea of risking. Here's what he says. He says, we become so afraid of death that we never live, so afraid of failure that we never risk, and so afraid of pain that we never discover how strong we really are. Isn't that so true? Most of us are so scared of our failures. We're so scared of death that we never truly live. How many of you have been so scared to take a risk because you're afraid of the exposure? But we'll never know how strong we really are until we're willing to take the risk. And so the first thing risk does, it gives us opportunity that we never had before. The second thing it does, it confronts our insecurities. And the last thing that risk does, and that we see in this story, is that risk strengthens our faith. Risk strengthens our faith. Peter's risk to get out of the boat, to walk on water with Jesus, led to everybody in that boat trusting and believing God even more. Their faith was enlarged like none other. They got to see God move in their lives like never before. It witnessed things that they could have never imagined because of the fact that Peter was willing to step out. And his faith became stronger, and so did everybody else around him. I know a lot of people who say, you know what? I haven't seen God move in my life in a while. I don't know where God is. Well, let me tell you this. When's the last time that you put yourself in a position where you only had to lean on God? A lot of us, we live such safe lives that we don't need God. But the fact of the matter is, if we were to actually live the life that God has called and created us to live, we would need God every single day because we would need to lean on Him like never before. But so many of us, we live such safe and comfortable lives that there's no room for God. And so may I challenge you today, take a step into the unknown. Take a risk that only God could help you with. And I guarantee you, God will meet you halfway. But you have to be willing to put yourself out there. Peter not only saw Jesus as the Son of God, Peter got to experience Jesus as the Son of God. His faith grew and became alive because of the risk that he was willing to take. And I wonder what would happen to our lives today if we would take the risk that God is calling us to take. Would it make our lives different? How are you called today to step out? And how could your faith grow more and more because of it? If you were willing to allow God to be the person that you leaned on more than ever. Some people hate hardships and trials, but sometimes they're incredible. Because when we go through difficult times, when we go through pain and misery and things that we don't understand, those are the times that we lean on God the most. And we allow God into the places that only He can come into. And today, if you're in one of those places, may I encourage you, lean on God more than ever before, because He wants to strengthen your faith more than ever. And I don't know about you, but I want to see God move in my life more than I ever have. But I know it starts with me being willing to take a risk. I love this quote I found at the beginning of the week. It kind of sums up everything we're talking about this morning. It says this: life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty, well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Wow, what a ride." Isn't that an incredible quote by Hunter Thompson? I thought that was incredible, like thinking about the lives that we get to live. So what do you want your life to look like? Do you want this well-preserved, nice, safe life? Or do you want people to talk about your life? That you thoroughly lived it, that you did everything you could with every moment that you had to live the life to the fullest that you were created to live? To come in, skid up, a little broadside, smoke everywhere, and loudly proclaiming that was an incredible ride. Or just safe, normal, average. I don't know about you, but I want a life fully lived when I leave this earth. I want to know that I gave it everything that I had, that I was willing to take the risk so that I could see the opportunity. I was willing to take the risk to confront some of my insecurities, and I was willing to take the risk so that my faith could grow stronger than ever. But what about you today? You get one life. How are you going to choose to live it? And so if we're honest with ourselves today, taking risk isn't easy. But if I were to ask you today, if there's a risk that God is calling you to take, what would it be? What is God asking you to step out into? Is it to finally go after that relationship that you know needs some work? Or you just need to step out into it? Or maybe it's that job that you know you've been dying to take and you're just too scared to do it. Maybe it's to finally get that healing that you've been searching for. Maybe it's to go after that friendship that you know needs some work. I don't know what risk God is asking you to take. I know the risk that He's asking me to take. But today, how could we all be the risk takers that God has created and God has called us to be? Let's stop running from God and start running towards God into the risk that He has for you and for me. And so today, what I want us to do at all of our campuses, I want us to practice taking a risk for a moment. It's not going to be anything too crazy, but we sang this song in the beginning called Oceans. And it's kind of a story of Peter and him stepping out into the unknown. And this is what the lyrics said: "Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior." And so what I'm going to ask at all of our campuses together today, would you go ahead and stand up with me for a moment? And what I want you to do, don't worry about the person next to you or everybody else around you. I'm going to ask all the bands to come back out for a moment, and I want us to sing this song together with a new set of lens and perspective. And I want you to ask God during this song, where is it, God, that you want me to step out? God, what is the risk that I need to take? And as we sing this song, it's kind of a declaration and a prayer together. I want you to think about the life that you're living. And is this a life that you were called and created to live? Or is there a risk that God is asking you to take? And you have to trust Him and step out into the boat and see what He has in store for you. Let me pray for you real quick, and then we're going to take a moment to sing this song together. God, I thank you so much for our time together today. God, I know it's not easy to to risk or to step out. But God, I know that you did not call us to live a life of comfort or complacency, but God, you called us to live a life that is fully alive. And so God, I ask today that you would take our one lives, that we would place it before you. And God, you would do something incredible with it. God, that we would stop waiting around for an opportunity, God, and we would see you and meet you in that opportunity, whatever it is. That God, would we be willing, just like Peter, to step out into the unknown of what you've called us to do. God, during this song, I just pray that you meet us where we're at. God, no matter what we're going through, what we're struggling with, God, that you help us understand that we have one life here on this earth and that you want to help us live it to its fullest potential. We love you, we praise you, and we thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We hope this message will help you continue to explore, experience, and express God's grace and truth for your life. If Atlee Church is making a difference in your life, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions from this message, we'd love to talk to you. Email us at stories@atleechurch.org. Check out our website for more about our community, our ministries, and how you can financially support Atlee Church to help us continue to share messages like this one. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. We have links on our website, or you can search for us on iTunes to get this podcast every week. Thanks again, and hope to see you next Sunday.